What's been covered so far? Last week, Bobby gave me his outline for the material you covered, dealing with Achan and his sin. And it looks like you guys did a pretty thorough job over that. So we'll do some reading in chapter 8 tonight. I need a reader for 1 through 9. 9 verses, the first 9 verses. Now, let's not waste time now. Who will read? Okay, Bonnie, 1 through 9, 10 through 17. BJ, and 18 to 23, and we'll stop at that point. Right? Okay, thank you, Sean. Shane, I called you Sean Sunday, too. All right, one of these, give me about 6 years or so. I got that same thing going on Johnny does. I don't know, it must be contagious or something. All right, chapter 8, Joshua. Bonnie.
Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take all your fighting men and attack Ai, for I have given you the king of Ai, his people, his town, and his land. You will destroy them as you destroyed Jericho and its king. But this time you may keep the plunder and the livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the town." So Joshua and all the fighting men set out to attack Ai. Joshua chose 30,000 of his best warriors and sent them out at night with these orders: hide in ambush close behind the town and be ready for action. When our main army attacks, the men of Ai will come out to fight as they did before, and we will run away from them. We will let them chase us until we have drawn them away from the town. For they will say, "The Israelites are running away from us as they did before." Then, while we are running from them, we will jump up from your ambush and take possession of the town. For the Lord your God will give it to you. Set the town on fire as the Lord has commanded. You have your orders. So they left and went to the place of ambush between Bethel and the west side of Ai. But Joshua remained among the people in the camp that night.
Now Joshua arose early in the morning and rescued the people. He went out with the elders of Israel before the people to Ai. Then all the people of war who were with him went up and drew near and arrived in front of the city and camped on the north side of Ai. Now there was a valley between him and Ai, and he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. So they stationed the people, all the army that was on the north side of the city and its rear guard on the west side of the city. And Joshua spent that night in the midst of the valley. It came about when the king of Ai saw it, that the men of the city hurried and rose up early and went out to meet Israel in battle, he and all his people at the appointed place before the desert plain. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel continued to be beaten before them and fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. So not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who had not gone out after Israel, and they left the city unguarded and pursued Israel.
Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city." So Joshua held out his javelin toward Ai. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. The men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising against the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. For the Israelites who had been fleeing toward the desert had turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from the city, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. The men of the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua.
Excellent. All right. What's the first thing God tells him in chapter 8 as it begins? All right, we heard that before. It's the theme of the book. He started out telling him that, but why would he reiterate that at this point? All right, they just had a bad situation with Achan. It was a mess. Everybody's morale probably went down the tubes, and so now It's like a new start, a new beginning, starting over. And God says, don't be afraid, don't be dismayed. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to take Ai. So how many soldiers does he send against Ai this time? 30,000. How many did he send the first time? I think it was 3,000. Go back to chapter 7. Yeah, so about 3,000 men, chapter 7, verse 4. Went up there, but they fled. They said, you don't need many guys to take Ai. That's a little podunk town. We'll take 3,000 guys and we'll take care of it. We'll mop them up. So they went up there and they were beaten and they fled. Of course, we know it's not because of the lack of troops. Why was it that they were beaten at Ai?
Guidance. They thought they'd do it themselves.
Achan
Because the Achan sinned.
had taken the stuff. He had sinned, and there was sin in the camp. That's why they failed at Ai. It had nothing to do with military strength or anything like that. It was that God was not going to prosper them while they were sin in the camp. So now they've taken care of that sin. God says, all right, let's get back on track here. Don't be afraid. Don't let the past circumstances, in other words, make you afraid. How many times do we in life look back at our situation in the past and maybe somebody once said what I have always thought. Everybody has a certain degree of an inferiority complex. Except for one guy. He said he didn't have an inferiority complex. He really was inferior. So, but we all lack confidence to a certain degree when certain things come along. And even when we have confidence, like Peter. Peter was confident in the garden, was he not? I think he was confident. When Jesus was about to be arrested, what did Peter do? Whipped out his sword and started attacking, slashing, man. He was getting after it. And Jesus said, hey, put your sword up in your place. What did Peter do after that? That's when he ran. Because things weren't going the way he expected them to go. Have you noticed in life that sometimes things don't go the way you expect them to go? Yeah. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and he says, hey, you've got a mass. We don't know what this is. We've got to look into it. Life is like that. All the time. All the time. Even the days that go the way we think they might ought to go, it's like we go, okay, we got through this one. Because you didn't know it was going to happen. People say, what are you planning on preaching on Sunday? Well, I'm planning on preaching this. Well, I don't know how it's going to go, though, when I get up there. Sometimes I say some dumb things I wasn't planning on saying. And a lot of times I leave out stuff I meant to say. But life is like that. So now we're back to a situation where God says, all right, you've called on me and I've got things, I've helped you get things back in order. Now here's what you're going to go. Or here's what you're going to do. You're going to take 30,000 men and you're going to attack Ai. Now I'm assuming that God has come up with this plan because the Lord's talking to Joshua and he says, I've given you the city, but it doesn't say that God gives him the specifics of the plan, how they're going to do it. It just says, I'll go down in verse 7, for example. When you rise from your ambush and take possession of the city, for the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. And then he says something else later on, according to the word of the Lord. That's how it's going to be done. At any rate, I couldn't tell from the text if it's a definite deal that God has given them the specifics of this plan. But this is a military plan. How did they take Jericho? They marched around it, and God made the walls fall down. That's not normal. This is much more normal. This is strategy and tactics here. But 30,000 soldiers are selected in verse 3 is what we're told. Now when you get down to verse 25, which we didn't get that far because I had you stop at 23. But 25 says, all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. So 12,000, that's probably how many people were at Ai. If there's 12,000 people, there's probably not that many soldiers. Probably not even half that many were soldiers. So we're talking several thousand against 30,000. There's an old military adage that says, if it's a fair fight, you haven't planned well enough. Because when you go to war, it should be overwhelming odds in your favor. That's what you should want when you go to war, so you can win overwhelmingly. And at this point, that's what they've got. It seems interesting to me, God basically fought the battle for them to a great extent with Jericho, even though they had to go up and take the city after the walls fell down. But in this situation, The soldiers are going to do all the fighting. God's not making any walls fall down. No miracles here. But the plan is pretty straightforward. We're going to camp outside the city, so when they get up in the morning, they'll see us out there, and they'll come out and attack us, and when they do, we'll run off like we're running like we did last time. Maybe that's what they'll expect. And when they chase us away from town, what's going to happen? The other guys sit in ambush who are hiding are going to come out and go into town and take care of it. And then, of course, the bad guys look back and say, man, our town's on fire. We don't have anywhere to go. We're going to lose this fight. And sure enough, they did. Very different situation from Jericho. But the people are taking more of a part in this. And what do you suppose the morale factor is after they take care of AI? Think it's improved? Yeah. Okay, now we're back on track. Now we're back on track. That's the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be winning. God's promised us He'd give us everything, and now we're back on track, and He actually is. All right, observations, questions, comments about any of this so far? Yes, Michelle.
The reason the way the Lord had them do it that way is because that way they'd have unity to actually everybody do what His plan was instead of going, well, last time He didn't want to help us.
Right, there was direction this time. They had a plan. Whether it came from God or not, there was a plan. And as you're pointing out, there apparently wasn't much of a plan last time. They just you guys go on up there and take care of it. Without consulting God, without getting a plan from God, without getting a blessing from God, without getting a go-ahead from God, that's what they did with AI. Why do you think they did that with AI? And Larry, you don't have to answer that question, but...
I was going to ask a question.
Oh, okay, well, go ahead and ask a question. We'll have 2 questions on the table then.
Okay, in verse 2, it says, take only its spoil and its cattle. What would not be included in the spoil and the cattle? I'm not sure.
You shall do to Ai and its king, just as you did to Jericho and its king. You shall take only its spoil and its cattle as plunder for yourselves. Set an ambush for the city. Apparently not the people. The spoil and the cattle, the spoil would have been whatever material wealth there would have been. Like Achan. What did Achan take? Certain amount of silver, certain amount of gold, and what else? Some clothing. Some clothing. He saw that stuff, and it was pretty. Yes. I think all the people were killed. 12,000, it says, down in verse 25.
Why did they always kill a baby?
I know, that seems harsh, doesn't it? There is a wisdom with God that we can't attain to, and here it is in my estimation. God knows exactly what's going to happen with those children once they pass out of this life. He knows they're going to be with Him. So if you allow those little babies to stay, they grow up and they say, well, if I'm not a Jew, who am I? What am I? Well, you're one of the people who were a Canaanite. Well, what's a Canaanite? Oh, you people killed my family? Well, I'm going to find some way to bring vengeance on this, and I'm going to know my upbringing. I don't know. It doesn't say, but we do know that God is the one in control of the souls. And Ezekiel, he would later have Ezekiel write, the soul that sins, it will die. The sins of the father shall not be attributed to the son. The sins of the son shall not be attributed to the father. That's Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 4 and 20. And so it's very clear that there's no such thing as original sin, and that these young people are not going to be dying in their sin, but they will die.
It was a common thing when one country took over another country to kill all the males, keep all the females, and kill the children. It was just as common as dirt.
Also,
Get rid of the problem.
Also, Marty, it's to keep them from going into adultery, whatever they might be worshiping against God. You know, we don't want to, if you're intermarrying with these people, we want you to kill them, wipe them out, so you can be God's people, directed by God. Because these people will, they're pagans or whatever, or idolaters or whatever, they'll lead them away. We're going to find out through the rest of the chapters, all the way to chapter 24. That happens time and time again because they didn't do it, and they're being married, and God wasn't pleased. You know, now we've got to go back and start all over again. When he says wipe them out, he means wipe them out.
Right. Al? Or,
Yeah,
With Sodom and Gomorrah, because you can look back through the Old Testament and see multiple examples of things that might have been similar to this. It's like was said, this is not all explained here. But as Billy was saying, they had idols and other little artifacts and things like that, and there was corruption in it. Sometimes absolute and complete corruption, to where the people became completely reprobate. There may have been diseases and other factors involved, and as Billy was saying, when people get off into those things, their minds can be way off. And it may be that God had decided there was nothing that he could do with these people whatsoever at all. And he certainly wasn't going to bring them into the fold of his new nation, because they would have been ruined. And we look at something like that and we think, ooh, boy, this is bad. Everybody was killed. But it may have been just a rotten situation morally that could not have been corrected.
Well, keep reminding yourself of Genesis 15. That's where God tells Abram that it's going to be about 400 years before your people go into Canaan, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. In other words, 400 years. They've got 400 years to think, why are we doing things this way? Let's repent. Let's do better. Let's go back to God. 400 years, they never did it. It just got worse and worse and worse. And so with Genesis 15 in mind, we know, all right, God brought a judgment that was due. What was the flood all about? It was a judgment that was due, and God did not tell Noah, you get 2 of every kind of animal, 7 of the clean, and all the little children. Don't let any little children die. He didn't say that. All the little children died in the flood that were on the earth except for Noah's family. It's horrible to think like that, but that's... It's almost like they were a nation of human beings. Billy?
I'm ahead of myself, but in chapter 12, we're talking about the kings that were defeated, the king of Bashan, whatever. That refers back to Deuteronomy 20, verse 17. And you read that over there, and it says, completely destroyed them, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, Hivites, and Jezreelites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow their detestable ways and worship their gods. That's why he's telling them to do this. You have to do this, or you're going to end up worshiping these people's gods. That was Deuteronomy 20:17, that last statement I had.
Leviticus 18, I think, has some of the same stuff. Do not defile yourself by any of these things, for all these the nations which I'm casting out before you have become defiled. For as the land has become defiled, therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so that the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien nor the sojourner, one who sojourns with you. For the men of the land who have been before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land will not spew you out. You should you defile it, as it spewed out the nation which has been before you. Whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among their people. Thus you are to keep my charge, that you do not practice any of the abominable customs which you have been practiced before you, so as not to defile yourselves with them. I am the Lord your God. So there's this idea of the land spewing the people out. I don't understand that, and God didn't explain that. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there are quite a few things in the Bible where God says, almost to say to us, I'm not going to take the time to explain this to you. I'm just going to tell you this is what I did, and you're going to have to trust me that I'm right. It's almost like a parent would do to a child, unless you're one of those terribly permissive parents who just feels like you have to justify yourself to your children with everything you do. No, you're the parent, you're the adult. You do what you know is right, and the child just has to put up with it. That's one of the things you have to learn in life, that there are authorities higher than you, and they don't have to explain themselves for everything they do. Because we're Americans and we live in this Western culture, we have this idea that, well, you can't do that unless you explain that to me first. Well, no, not necessarily. And how crazy would life be if everything had to explain to everybody before we moved ahead with anything? So God says, 400 years, Abraham, and I'm going to send your children in, and they're going to wipe everybody out. Because if they don't, they're going to learn the ways of the people who were there. And God doesn't even say, don't worry about the little children because I'm going to take care of them. But we know he does because of what Jesus said. Like little children, such are the kingdom of heaven. Interesting questions, very probing theological questions, but
Put words in to give credence to another area. When he said, let these children come in because they would be, he was talking about a specific point in time. All these little noisy kids right here, get back. That he wasn't talking about past centuries ago. He was talking about right then and there because his disciples, his students, was angry with little children. We wanted to see it at that time. It wasn't.
so when do you think a child becomes guilty of sin?
What I think, it doesn't matter. It's
So do you think those children were guilty of sin? I mean, I know what we think doesn't matter,
It
but
doesn't matter to God. It doesn't matter whether you're guilty or innocent. Like he said to that lady who was caught in the very act of adultery. She says, no, they didn't say nothing wrong with you. So,
well, that was an obvious forgiveness of sin.
whatever is whatever. You can't put God in a box and say he will jump through this crack.
I'm not trying to put him in a box. I'm trying to say that God's the one we trust to take care of this. If he says kill all the little ones, you kill all the little ones, and you let him deal with whatever fallout there is.
He could be like little dog. I mean, what's dad's dad? See, he never, in the Old Testament, said that he was going to be an afterlife to you. It was just, if you're good, you'll keep your country. If you're bad, you won't.
You mean you're saying the Jews did not expect to have an afterlife?
No.
You're not saying that, or you are saying that they didn't?
I'm saying the Old Testament never said that the Jews would have an afterlife.
He said that Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker was God, and it wasn't a city on the earth. So Abraham must have been looking for something, and Abraham's prior to the covenant. Even Martha talked about the resurrection.
That's true.
I know we'll see my brother in the resurrection.
Martha get her information. Hellenized Jews, the Greeks, believed in an afterlife.
You're saying that there was no concept of an afterlife? Where did 1 Samuel,
They never did say that if you're good, you'll go to an afterlife.
but they believed in an afterlife. That's what I'm saying. There was something.
Where the Jews really thought their afterlife was from the Hellenized,
Well, here in 1 Samuel chapter 28, as it came about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel, and Achish said to David, know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, and you and your men. And David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. So the Philistines gathered together and came and camped at Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they camped in Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him either by dreams or by the Urim or by the prophets. Saul said to his servants, seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, behold, there's a woman who is a medium at Endor. There's the witch of Endor. This is where she comes from. Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. But the woman said to him, Behold, you know what Saul has done, how he's cut off those who were mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. And then the woman said, Whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, Bring up Saul for me. In other words, there was this idea that just because people are dead, they're not dead. They still exist. And he was asking her to bring Samuel up. So when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. Now here's the thing, just a little parenthetical question. Why do you think she cried out? She wasn't expecting to see Saul. I don't know that her power was any power indeed, or if she was just bewitching people. Whatever it was, but Samuel came up. And Saul knew that Samuel was somewhere, and he wanted to talk to Samuel, so he goes to the spirit medium, and whether it's her or God, that's not even explained. It says that Saul spoke to Samuel. But why would he have even gone to seek Saul if he didn't believe in life after death? So that concept was with the Israelite people. They didn't get it from somewhere else. This idea of life after death was something that they held, which well, I thought you just said the Jews didn't believe in it. I thought you just said a while ago that the Jews didn't believe in it. Well, where did they get the idea? Where did they get the idea? If Abraham was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God, there must have been some idea in his mind, and Hebrews points that out as...
That'd be the same thing as us saying, we're going to go down to Dallas, see? It's a point in time for a future event.
Yeah, that's not the way the Hebrew writer presents it. He's showing Abraham as a man of faith looking for something that he couldn't get on this earth.
Abraham had never been into Canaan land. He said, you go and in the future will be provided. Am I right?
He wasn't pointing him to Canaan, or Abraham wasn't looking for that. And that's the whole reason that the Hebrew writer brings it up.
What was the name of the Hebrew writer?
Don't know. Yes.
As early as Genesis 3, which was way back, when the serpent tempted Eve, she fell into temptation. By the way, what was the serpent anyway? It wasn't human. So there's some indication there that there's something else or other things other than us, first. And then secondly, God said to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and the seed of the woman shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is a prophecy that rang throughout. It still does today. Who bruised the head of the serpent?
And why would that be of any importance whatsoever if I'm going to be dead and completely gone?
And the cultures, those ancient cultures, as do Eastern cultures today, when they speak, a lot of their words have word pictures to them. Most of our words do not. And we're more technical, we're more mathematical, we're more material. But the cultures and the languages of the East are very pictorial. And hearing these things from this great Lord, this was said to this entity and to these people, they would be thinking about word pictures of what this was. There's something beyond. And that's what, as Jackie was saying, that's one of the reasons why when Abraham was commanded to take his son up to the mount and kill him, it says in Hebrews, he knew that God would raise him from the dead.
That was his faith, which is pointed out in the same chapter here in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11:8, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he lived as an alien in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. A little later on in down, it says, those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. In other words, they had a concept of something beyond this world and this life, something that God had prepared, which is even what Jesus says in Matthew 25. He says, come inherit the kingdom that I prepared for you from the foundations of the world. There was this thought about an afterlife, and without that thought, there's really no motivation to do what's right, because if the only punishment you'll receive is what you'll suffer in this life, then all you have to do is not get caught, which is exactly the basis upon which a lot of people work. They just think, well, I'll just do evil and I won't get caught and I'll be okay. But with God, we know, all right, even if the law doesn't catch me, I'm going to have to answer to God eventually. And you're much better off for the law to catch you and to answer to the law here than you are to answer for God. I don't know who's first, but.
Even the Egyptians believed in the afterlife because embalming what they did and everything they put in their tombs shows that they did. They believed in the afterlife. They would take it with them. They knew something was better than this life, so they embalmed them.
Sure.
Pharaohs or kings and whoever.
And here's something I think we sometimes forget. Where did the ancient Egyptians come from?
Say that again.
Where did the ancient Egyptians come from? Where did everybody come from? Adam and Eve, and then the flood, and then who did everybody come from? Noah and his family. And then where was humanity dispersed? At the Tower of Babel. So everybody on the earth came from that initial 8 people after the flood. Whatever Noah and his family knew about God, they probably taught. And so all of these concepts of heaven, an afterlife, of hell, of punishment, these aren't things that the Egyptians came up with. Well, no, the Egyptians were the offspring of somebody from Noah's family. Every nation, every culture. There's even, and you can do your own research on this if you want to, it's very interesting, Chinese characters. There are many people who claim that the Chinese characters tell the creation story with the garden and a snake in the garden and 2 people in the garden, and the number 8, if I remember right, the number 8 is people in a boat. That's China. We're talking about ancient Egypt and their belief in an afterlife. All people came from Noah and his family. And even when you look at secular history, anybody ever heard of the cradle of civilization? There is this claim, well, all civilization started in one place. Well, isn't that interesting? Isn't that kind of what the Bible teaches? All they had to do was read the Bible. At any rate, what these folks knew, well, we don't know all of it. God didn't record everything that they knew, so we would know everything that they knew, but he recorded for us what we needed to know about what they knew. And so today we understand they were having the same spiritual struggles we were. They were dealing with the same sense of judgment impending that we are. They were having the same sense of guilt that needed to be resolved the same as we do. This is why sacrifice goes all the way back. What was Noah doing after he got off the ark? Built an altar, made a sacrifice. Why did he do that? Well, I'm not completely sure because it doesn't explain, but it might have something to do with, number 1, thanksgiving, but number 2, guilt that needs to be absolved by the shedding of blood. Where was the first blood shed in sacrifice? Maybe it was those animals that God killed to make skins to clothe Adam and Eve. But sacrifice goes way back. The blood seems to be an answer for sin long before the law was given on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai simply just incorporated that idea because it was probably something that God had originally given. What was the sacrifice that Cain did not offer, but his brother Abel did? It was a blood sacrifice. He gave offerings of his flock. And Cain said, I got vegetables. I got the sides here to go with your main dish. And God said, I don't want vegetables. And if you do right, you'll be accepted. So all this stuff goes back. It doesn't go back to ancient Egypt. It doesn't go back to China. Ancient Egypt and ancient China go back to the Tower of Babel, which goes back to Noah and his family. So this isn't a Jewish religion. This is God who brought all people onto the earth. And we read about racism. Well, how many races are there? There's one. There's one race. We come in a variety of shapes and sizes and colors, but we are one race. And we all came from the same man, and then we came from the same family after the flood. So there's a lot of commonality, and there should be. We should expect there to be commonality. All right. Back to Joshua 8. Let's see here. We read down through verse 23. Let's read 24 through 29. Who's got that? Need a reader? Anybody? All right, Bonnie.
When the Israelite army finished chasing and killing all the men of Ai in the open fields, they went back and finished off everyone inside. So the entire population of Ai, including men and women, was wiped out that day, 12,000 in all. For Joshua kept holding out his spear until everyone who had lived in Ai was completely destroyed. Only the livestock and the treasures of the town were not destroyed, for the Israelites kept these as plunder for themselves, as the Lord had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned the town of Ai, and it became a permanent mound of ruins, desolate to this very day. Joshua impaled the king of Ai on a sharpened pole and left him there until evening. At sunset, the Israelites took down the body as Joshua commanded and threw it in front of the town gate. They piled a great heap of stones over him that can still be seen today.
All right. So Ai's been defeated. King's been executed. Everybody knows about it. And this page, last page, has been turned. Whew, okay. We're back in business with God. Amen? I would think that's where they would be. So what happens next in verse 30? Let's read about it. 30 through 35. Who's got it? All right, PJ.
Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the sons of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses. An altar of uncut stones, on which no man had wielded an iron tool, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. He wrote there on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written in the presence of the sons of Israel. All Israel, with their elders and officers and their judges, were standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord. The stranger as well as the native, half of them stood in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given command at first to bless the people of Israel. Then after he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers who were living among them.
What was it that they did? They divided up, got half of Israel on Mount Ebal, half of Israel on Mount Gerizim, and then the law was read. This goes all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 11. This is where God initiated it. Deuteronomy chapter 11. This it shall come about in verse 29. When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you're entering to possess it, that you shall place the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. Are they not across the Jordan, west of the way toward the sunset, in the land of the Canaanites who live in Arabah, opposite Gilgal, beside the oaks of Moreh? For you're about to cross the Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall possess it and live in it. You shall be careful to do all the statutes and the judgments which I'm setting before you today. So this is Moses. He's telling Israel, when you cross the Jordan River, these two mountains that are in Canaan are the mountains you're going to use. Half of you are going to get on Ebal, And you're going to repeat the curses. Half of you are going to get on Gerizim. You're going to repeat the blessings. And that's what we see them doing here in chapter 8. It's reiterated in chapter Deuteronomy 27, though. Deuteronomy 27:1, when Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you today. So it shall be on that day when you cross the Jordan to the land which the Lord your God gives you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and coat them with lime, and write on them all the words of this law when you cross over, so that you may enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. So it shall be when you cross the Jordan, you shall set up on Mount Ebal these stones, which I'm commanding you today, and you shall coat them with lime. Then it goes on to talk about the altar and how it would work. That verse 14, the Levites shall then answer and say to all the men of Israel with a loud voice, cursed is the man who makes an idol for a molten image, an abomination to the Lord, the work of the hands of the craftsman, and sets it up. And all the people shall answer and say, amen. So this is what was happening. This is what they're doing in Joshua 8. They're following through with what they've been taught to do by Moses. On Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal was where the curses were read. Mount Gerizim was where the blessings are read. And what else is happening? These stones are being set up, coated with lime. And what's written on that lime-coated stone? The law of God. Writing down the law of God. Pretty interesting. Now, I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that. Well, I don't think it's Genesis through Deuteronomy like we normally think of the law. I think they were the ceremonial parts. But the interesting thing is, we don't even know that. I mean, we can conjecture what we think went on those stones, but we don't know. Whatever it was God's law. And when the people wanted to see what God's law was, they could go to those stones, and there it was. Well, it's representative. The Ten Commandments are at least representative. But there was more, like when you read about Zechariah and Elizabeth. Said they were people who were righteous according to the whole law, which would have to be more than just the Ten Commandments. That's Luke chapter, is it Luke 2? Is it 3? It's one of them Luke chapters. Oh, here we go. Verse 6, Luke 1, verse 6, they were both righteous in the sight of the Lord, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. All the commandments and requirements, that would seem to extend beyond the Ten Commandments, because there's a lot of the law beyond the Ten Commandments. At any rate, whatever it was a monument that had the law of the Lord written on it, and they had that video or visual reference, but they also had the audio reference of hearing the priests read the law, the blessings and the curses, and then when the priests would read it, the people would amen it. All of them. How long that took, it doesn't say. But when we get to heaven, I think that would be a pretty cool DVD to check out. Yeah, especially if it's got surround sound. Boy, put that in there. Anyway. Well, we didn't get too far. That's all right. We'll get as far as we can. And you're allowed to read this at home. Anybody got anything before we bring class to a close? All right? Who, Satan? Oh, I don't think he was a simply physical being like an angel. I mean, an angel could appear as a physical being, but he's not limited to that. So. I couldn't tell you. I've wondered about that too. If part of his curse was to go about on his belly, then he must have had legs before the curse. So does that have anything to do with the dinosaurs? I don't know. What did he look like then? All righty, Lord willing, we'll start in chapter 9 next week.